Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. This is episode 4 of the Baseball and Beer podcast. Of course, I'm Brendan Bowes, and I am your host for this wonderful journey through two of America's greatest things in the world. That is, of course, the sport of baseball and the beer or beverage of beer, I guess. Anyway, I hope everyone had a good week so far. Seems like the weather has finally become summertime, even though it's technically still spring, but we're not going to harp on that. Warm weather is warm weather, and that's all we're looking for. It's time to say goodbye to winter and enjoy the summer weather. For any questions, concerns, or any type of communique that you would want with me, I can be reached several different ways. First, via email, baseballbeerpodcast@gmail.com. Again, baseballbeerpodcast@gmail.com. If you're a big fan of Twitter, I can be found there at baseballbeerpod. The little at sign that Twitter is famous for, baseballbeerpod. If you want to listen to these podcasts directly from my website, you can find them at baseballandbeerpodcast.blogspot.com. Otherwise, I do have a feed up on iTunes. You should be getting them if you're subscribed. You should be getting them that way. If not, then please subscribe. Not that I'm trying to get millions and millions of viewers, or rather listeners in this case, but it's always nice to have different avenues of people listening to the show. So if you've been listening to me previous weeks, you've known that I've talked about the TV show Arrow on the CW. Well, I'm happy to announce that I've finally caught up with all 3 seasons. I am up to date, and I am enjoying very much what I've seen so far. Like I said, for a CW show, the acting is phenomenal. The stories are dark, and the fight scenes are really good for, again, a CW show, for a superhero show that's not on any of the major cable networks. But I enjoy it. It's great. Looking forward to seeing what's going on for season 4 and beyond. Lastly, before we get on to the meat of the program, this may not mean a whole lot to a lot of people, but I just wanted to say congrats to Ring of Honor for their big TV deal, and fuck TNA. So, if we remember last week, I explained how I started homebrewing for the first time ever with a bunch of my friends. We brewed a very IPA beer. As you know, I'm not big into IPA, but it is what it is. Not soon after that, this past weekend, I have gone ahead and now I can say I've helped brew 2 sets of different beers. This time it was a wheat beer. Not much difference between the 2 of them, except for possibly the fact that we used actual grains and rice and wheat to make our malt rather than using malt concentrate extract. Basically, it kind of allows us to be more precise with how we wanted to set the mash, so the wheat beer tastes more like how we wanted it. So that's why we did that. But once we got the mash going and we were able to make the wort and get the wort boiling, instead of doing 3 different sets of hop drops, as I'm calling it, or 3 different times that we drop hops into the wort, we did a set of hops, obviously to get the taste. We added some coriander, and we added some both bitter oranges as well as sweet oranges. One of the other benefits is that it's a shorter time to ferment, so we should be able to taste this quicker than the IPA, if not at the same time. So again, like everything else, I will let you guys know what it tastes like once I am able to get my hands on a bottle. Oh, silly me. Also, one of the other big differences is that instead of using a powdered yeast, we used a liquid yeast. To be honest, I'm not 100% certain what the difference is, but I'm pretty sure it's considerable. So, one of the other things I did this past weekend, now, I know I pretty much pound this into oblivion, but it's got to be said just so that the potency of my explanation here weighs heavier than most others. So, uh, as I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of IPAs. I try to stay away from them. I'd rather have a whole different array of beers. I can understand why people like them. I will drink them, but they're not going to be my number one choice, or number two choice, or number three choice, four choice, five, six, seven. You know where I'm going with this. So, but one of the things that my friends and I did is that we gathered some of the top IPAs that we could find, and we gave ourselves a nice little flight. Uh, in this were some beers that I've previously mentioned, traditionally, or not traditionally, typically the Treehouse beers that I talked about last week. The Julius beer, Julius IPA. We also had Green, which is also from Treehouse. I hadn't had that before. We also had Sip O Sunshine, which is a very popular IPA, at least here in the Northeast. I'm not sure what its popularity is outside, but I know it's a sought after IPA or sought after beer just in general. Um, we also had a Captain's Daughter, which is an IPA from Grace Sale Brewery down in Rhode Island. Now, even though this is not an IPA, we also had Eureka from Treehouse. Um, it's a blonde ale, but the fact that it's a hoppy version of a blonde ale just makes it taste like an IPA. So we threw out the rulebook in that and used it anyway. So if there was one IPA that I can see myself drinking for the rest of my life, it would probably be Julius. In terms of ranking this IPA flight that my friends and I just decided to make, Julius would certainly be number one. Um, the hoppiness isn't proficient, it's there, but the taste of the actual beer itself is phenomenal, and that big reason why it gets number one in my book. Number two is also Treehouse, but not green. It's going to be Eureka, the heavy hopped blonde ale. It's good. It's a very good blonde ale, and even though it's hoppy blonde ale, it's still good. I have no complaints over it. Very, I want to say sweet, but that's not the right word. It's different from an IPA, but it still tastes like an IPA. That's probably the best way I can explain it, but that's why it's number two, at least in my book. Sip of Sunshine. I guess I understand why so many people like it. I It's not anything outstanding to me. It's certainly no Julius, but again, I can see why people like it. I can see why the Connecticut package stores can't really hold on to it for very long periods of time, but it's just not my cup of tea. Captain's Daughter, it's a very if you like heavy and hard IPAs, this one is definitely one for you. It's very hoppy and very aggressive. I wasn't a big fan, as it's pretty much the definition of why I don't like IPAs. But again, my own criteria aside, I can see why people like it. And if you are an IPA lover, I would recommend getting it. But if you're not a big fan of IPAs like myself, then stay away. Green, Treehouse Green. I guess I'm kind of on the fence on. I didn't hate it, but I wasn't a big fan. It's kind of underwhelming, since as big of a fan of Julius as I am, that their other IPA would be just as good, but it's disappointed in that fact. But it's not as aggressive as Sip of Sunshine or Captain's Daughter, so it was to my liking in that sense. But it certainly wasn't better than Julius, and it wasn't better than Eureka, at least to me. All in all, a very successful flight of beer, of IPAs, I would say. You know, that grouping probably makes a lot of people jealous, but as someone who's not a big fan of IPAs, that doesn't mean a whole lot. I know they're popular, but you know, whatever. On the baseball front, I'm all set with the beer talk. So let's go with the other B word. Um, not a whole lot's happened in this week of baseball, so I wanted to go back and talk about some more advanced metrics. Uh, I know that I said that I wanted to spread these out, but again, like I said, not a whole lot's happened that's worth talking about in great detail. And these two that I want to talk about today kind of go hand in hand with on base percentage that I talked about this last week. And putting all this together, these first three advanced metrics will give you a very good concept, a very good grasp of the most basics of the sabermetric mindsets. So on base percentage, like I talked about last week, it's a good way to measure someone how someone performs at the plate, being just a hit, a walk, getting on an error, bunt, any end result of being on any end result of a plate appearance, and that gives you an on base percentage. Uh, but what you're missing, or another downside to batting average, is that it assumes everything that you hit is a single. Distinctively, a single is obviously better than a walk. Double is better than a single. Triple is better than a double. Home run is better than a triple. So obviously there is some value in someone that can hit more doubles than singles, more triples than doubles and singles, and someone who can hit a home run. So there should be some way to measure that, and that's where this next statistic is going to come in, and that's called slugging percentage. Slugging percentage measures basically the total amount of bases someone gets by the amount of at bats that they have throughout the season. So what I mean by total bases is, for example, a single is worth 1, double is worth 2, triple is worth 3. Obviously, a home run is worth 4. So throughout the season, take the amount of doubles, singles, triples, home runs that you've hit, take those total bases and divide it by the at bats that one has throughout that season. Again, that gives you slugging percentage, which is usually in the decimal form. Uh, Higher slugging percentage, what that means traditionally is that the player tends to hit the ball farther and harder, getting a lot of doubles and home runs. Triples are usually hard to come by on a regular basis, but someone who tends to hit more triples than not obviously will have a higher slugging percentage. Um, Obviously, singles, as even though they're still valuable, tend to bring down the slugging percentage, even not as much as an out would, because obviously one is higher than 0, but you get what I'm saying in terms of looking at the grand scheme of things. Obviously, the higher the slugging percentage, the more power that they have. So it'd be up to a general manager specifically if they want someone who, let's say has a batting average of 310, but those hits are singles, thus, not advancing runners a whole lot, or not putting themselves in a position to be scored, thus having a lower slugging percentage, whereas they might have an option to get a player that hits 260, 250 on the lower end of the batting average spectrum, but when they hit the ball, it's usually a double, usually far off the wall, or a triple, or rather not a triple, but a home run, thus scoring more runs, but not putting themselves on base a whole lot for other people to get them in. But if you're looking at a power hitter, that's traditionally what you get anyway. Someone with a low batting average and a high slugging. Again, so it's up to the general manager as to whether or not they want to, or rather which player that they want to get. You have to weigh the negatives and the positives, but being able to look at the slugging percentage just gives you a good idea of how strong they are or how powerful they can hit, what to expect in that part of the batting area. All right, so told you ways to measure how someone performs at the plate. Just went over how to measure someone in terms of how they hit the ball. So obviously the next course of action is to obviously just combine the two numbers. That's on base plus slugging, or better known as OPS. And it is just that. It literally is just taking the on base percentage and adding that to the slugging, and that gives you the OPS number. I told you it was simple as that. In an ideal world, OPS should give you a good idea about the performance of a player as it combines two of the most basic of advanced numbers, on base percentage and slugging. But like I said, that's in an ideal world. The problem here is that the quote unquote weight is evenly distributed on both parts of the equation, even though 99 times out of 100, your slugging percentage number is going to be greatly higher than the on base percentage number. So, what that means is that a guy whose value is in their ability to take walks but who doesn't hit for a lot of power is going to look worse than a guy who doesn't have a high batting average, maybe walks like an average amount of times, but when they do make contact, they hit it far. A lot of doubles, a lot of home runs. Um, Again, it's just one of those things where you have to, as a general manager, determine what you need or what you can get more value out of. But in terms of on base plus slugging, uh, just it's hard to use that as the tip top comparison number, even though it takes two good numbers by themselves. You would think putting them together would be the obvious choice. And again, as a basic, first look summary glance at a player, it is good, but it's not the best. Uh, Again, I'm just throwing these out there just to open your eyes on the wonderful world of Sabermetrics. Uh, I guess what I'm really saying is that I may not agree with all the numbers, but there's reasons why they're used and reasons why they are valid, reasons why a lot of people use them. But there are some that I just don't like, but that's not going to stop me from at least going over them in a fair manner. So before I started recording, I was just taking a glance at Baseball Reference, which is a very good resource for anyone who wanted to take a look at baseball numbers and see how certain players did at any point in time. But anyway, when I was looking at slugging percentage for players as well as on base percentage for numbers, and I guess this kind of ties into my weekly White Sox chat. They've gone from good to sucking, or something worse than sucking. I can't describe it. They've been terrible, awful, miserable to watch, and I'm sad that I'm a fan. Still like talking about them, which is why I'm bringing them up here, but they stink. That's all there is to it. Anyway, so like I said, I believe it was the first episode, maybe one of the first two. Talked about how one of my favorite non-White Sox players is Bryce Harper of the Washington Nationals. Right now he's on a tear. He's on a huge tear. At this point in time, his slugging percentage is a tick above 730, so .730 is what Bryce Harper is playing. That leads the league. That's an amazing number. Just to put it in perspective, it would lead the league probably over any point in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe longer. But that's just his slugging percentage. That doesn't take into account his on base percentage. So we're dealing with one number here. Take that in terms of the White Sox. Right now, as it stands, there's only two players from the White Sox whose total combined on base percentage and slugging percentage is higher than just Bryce Harper's slugging percentage. So you're taking two numbers for a player, and it's still not higher than one player's single number. I hope I'm explaining this correctly, because it's pretty crazy, both on how great Bryce Harper has been and how terrible the White Sox offense is. It might seem unfair to use the potentially National League MVP as a basis for this number, but Jesus Christ, it's embarrassing. It shouldn't be two White Sox players. It should be a lot of them that have an OPS above 730. As a hyperbole, I could go out there and bat 730 OPS, but White Sox are terrible. With that said, that does it for another week of Baseball and Beer Podcast. Again, I am Brendan Bose. If you want to reach out to me, I can be found either via email, baseballbeerpodcast@gmail.com. Again, baseballbeerpodcast@gmail.com. I can be found on Twitter. My Twitter handle is baseballbeerpod. Again, that's the @ baseballbeerpod. If you want to visit the website, want to look at any pictures that I'm putting up for the home brews or any other type of pictures that I feel like, need to download the podcast directly from the website itself rather than subscribing to iTunes. Uh, Although you really should be doing both, but you can find that information at baseballbeerpodcast.blogspot.com. Thanks again, everyone, for listening for this week's episode. I will return next week, as you would imagine. And signing off, I have not failed this city.